Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.20 mid lane tier list. So if you have content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the mid lane this patch. We had more in the preview than we actually had in the patch in the end. Things like Swain and Aso ended up being taken out and being moved to 14.21. But let's cover the changes. So to begin with, Veigar got nerfed. We saw buffs towards Tristana, Corki, Yasuo, Pantheon, and Yone. Then we saw some item adjustments, mostly focused around nerfing down Storm Surge and Luden's Companion. So the D tier is going to begin with Lucian. He's gained a bit of play rate. I'm pretty sure this is because of his presence at Worlds, even though obviously the patches don't align. They play on 14.18, this is 14.20. Seeing presence of champion does tend to increase their pick rate. I'm pretty sure it's someone like Zhao who's been playing a decent amount of it for Weibo. Other than that, I think we've seen some other players here and there, but not really like a main pick. It was just something some people feel comfortable on. Not great in solo queue though, definitely underperforms here, gonna be within my D tier. Corki got buffed, he still underperforms, going to remain within the D tier. He's in fact being buffed in 14.21, so that's like 3 patches in a row this champion's been buffed. Ezreal underperforms within the mid lane, alongside Tristana, who is another marksman, which does tend to see some level of play within the mid lane. She more recently got adjusted, and she's doing better now that she's kind of settled back to, like, pre-mega nerfed win rates, but she still underperforms in the mid lane at the moment. People do need to kind of get used to the changes to her kit, but I imagine she will probably rise back up over time. But for the moment, she does definitely perform kind of subpar in her current state. Smolder, still very popular within the mid lane. Honestly, kind of surprised. I thought his pick rate would decline over time, but he's maintained a pretty high pick rate. He's still within like the top 20 mid laners within the game, so definitely still, gonna stay relevant here. Still underperforms though, both in top and in the mid lane underperforms. And in fact, I believe he still underperforms in the ADC role. The champion just requires a bit too much to really get going, and oftentimes games can be closed out by that point. The champion can just struggle to really find its relevance. The other 3 champions here, we have Azir, and we have Kiana, and we have Talon. In Azir's case, he is being buffed, actually alongside both the other 2 here. I knew these champions had been underperforming since 14.18. Are reacting in 14.21, so 3 patches later, which is unfortunate for people who main these champions, but obviously in Azir's case, he's a competitive mainstay. They don't want this champion being too good, otherwise he becomes very dominant there, which is why they did nerf him in 14.18 to take him out of competitive. In Kiana's and Talon's case, they both just underperform since the item changes. Assassin items got overall substantially weaker compared to a lot of the other classes. Thus, these 2 took 2 of the biggest hits and then dropped down to the D tier. I imagine with buffs, even Kiana might not jump out of the D tier. This champion's intentionally kept on the weak side because of her dominance in elite play. This pick, whenever it's strong there, tends to really overperform and be very dominant in the hands of the best players at the the best players at the game. In the C tier, we have Akshan, who is also a pretty elite skewed AD pick. Still underperforms to a degree at the moment, not something I'd really recommend going to, especially within mid-elo. Same goes for Zed, another champion which underperforms currently. He has over the past been kept intentionally weak, mainly because of frustration reasons. He's not so much kept weak because of frustration reasons so much anymore, but more because he is weak from the assassin item changes akin to the likes of Talon and Kiana. Katarina, underperforming ever since they did a couple of changes to her. She overperformed for like a single patch, and then Riot instantly were like, nope, we're not having this, and then nerfed her back down, which is unfortunate. Obviously, if you're a Katarina main, you want your champion to feel good to play. And for like the general audience, this is a champion which most people just don't really go to, as it takes a lot of time to really pick up and play well, as she is very mechanically demanding. Not something I'd really recommend, especially with a mid-elo, unless you're very comfortable on this kind of a pick and you want to sink a lot of time into it. At that point, it doesn't really matter where my placement of the champion comes in, as you are playing what feels comfortable to you. In Aurelia's case, she has been underperforming ever since her adjustments, mainly to try and push her to be a bit more elite skewed. She is being changed in 14.21, alongside Bork nerfs and lethal tempo buffs, which might shift some things around. I don't suddenly see her going towards lethal tempo over the likes of PTA and Conqueror, but that is something to definitely be aware of. Overall, though, at the moment, on the current patch, still underperforming, so she remains within the C tier. And then we have Twisted Fate and the Fizz. Fizz lost a bit of power of Ludens and Storm Surge both being nerfed, as those were items you could kind of dabble into. Of course, Lich Bane is still a very nice item on him, but he does underperform and tends to be a bit better in matchups where, or coming as a counter pick into like matchups where you can really punish their lack of mobility and your high amounts of mobility to really like gap close onto them and then one-shot them and get away. In Twisted Fate's case, he's been underperforming ever since they tried to push AD Twisted Fate, and then they nerfed him just across the board, and AP Twisted Fate ended up being pretty nerfed because of that. It would be nice to see some Twisted Fate buffs. I do think this champion, when it is like good to play, is a relatively healthy champion for the game. It's like an AP mage / utility option which people can opt into in certain situations. He did receive a Q buff not too long ago, and that did help him briefly, but yeah, not doing too well with the item changes at the moment, going to remain within my C tier. Moving up, we have Yasuo. So Yasuo obviously got 2 buffs this patch, one to his Q critical strike damage, I believe, and then one to his R bonus armor pen. When you've used that ability, it gives you a bonus armor pen on critical strike, which is very nice. Overall, yeah, helped Yasuo a bit, pushes him up from the C tier to the B tier, even with items like Showbreaker underperforming and Grasping nerf, which were obviously 2 things he could opt into if he wanted to. Yeah, he's still a slight bit better, so he does move up into the B tier. Aurora stays within my B tier at the moment. This champion's slowly leveling out ever since her release. She has a pretty high skill curve. If you sink a lot of time into her, you would definitely be rewarded, and she could definitely rise up to like the S, close to the S plus tier, especially in the hands of the best players of this champion. For average play though, she kind of sits below the bar. I'd say she's closer to the C tier than most of my B tier picks at the moment. Just doesn't look to be too performant for, yeah, like the average player base. In Yone's case, he is going to remain in my B tier, just go up to the top of the B tier. This pick is obviously very dominant and elite and is being nerfed in 14.21. Obviously, he's also taking over Worlds at the moment as like the best champion you can play on the patch, mostly because he just doesn't really have a huge amount of counters within the mid lane. People are unwilling to flex things like Renekton, and Pantheon isn't great on that patch, so it makes it kind of like easy to just get away with not really being punished that heavily as Yone. Obviously, into some matchups where you're just not consistently dodging skill shots, you can be pushed out of lane, and yeah, that's gonna happen more consistently the lower rank you are. So Yone going to remain within my B tier, but if you're very comfortable on this pick, then he really shoots up as like the best AD mid laner in the game. Alongside Yone, we have Jace. Overall, just doing a bit better in the mid lane than the top lane. There's not much more to it. He's just never really found his footing just across this split in general. With mid lane, you tend to opt into things like Yomu's opportunity a bit more, and then just play around like your high upfront burst with things like Electrocute. Echo has been underperforming for a bit now. This champion could probably do with a slight buff for both jungle and mid, so just like a general kit buff just to help him out slightly. Obviously, the benefits of playing Echo with like the Halo Blade, Scorch, and just start E, and then you like pummel them level 1 to really get an advantage in laning phase. More people are aware of this, and yeah, it can be harder to find those advantages. So overall, I would just have him slightly below the bar at the moment within my B tier. Vladimir slowly being moved off of the grass build, which was underperforming even when it was pre-nerfed. Now that it's been nerfed, it's very underperformant. Just not something I'd really recommend going unless it is very, very like strong within the game, or like against certain compositions where you can really utilize the power of that ability. Overall, just go back to like the airy phase rush with the likes of Cosmic Drive, and just play around your Q, just chunking people out and then utilizing the sustain to really create advantages within laning phase, and then be a really strong mid to late game champion which can really abuse like heavy AP and health ratios within his kit. Gonna stay within my B tier for the moment. Orianna, the Luden's companion, got nerfed this patch. Does lose some power from that, so she does sit towards the lower end of the B tier. But if you're comfortable on the champion, once again, you can definitely find those advantages within laning phase, and her ultimate can still be a very powerful tool. Zoe, doing a bit better at the moment, definitely towards the higher end of my B tier, really benefiting from items like Lich Bane Rush. Obviously, you're not really going to see Zoe outside of like the mains of the champion, who are very comfortable at like knowing her damage thresholds, and then utilizing the summoner spell rotations, which can definitely be something different and unique to this champion compared to a lot of the other champions within the game. Yeah, and overall, she's just doing a bit better at the moment, definitely towards the higher end of my B tier. Ziggs, Akali, Garen, and Morgana wrap up my B tier. In Ziggs' case, he's fine. I think he's a solid artillery mage. I would recommend other things over him at the moment, especially if you're just not really that consistent at him and like you're CSing poorly. This champion can definitely lose a lot of its value. But overall, his artillery capability is still very nice. He's definitely one of the best sieges within the game, and that can definitely be a playstyle you can opt into and find success with. In Akali's case, she's doing a bit better at the moment, but still kind of subpar. I would say she's fine in certain matchups where you feel really comfortable on, but not something you can really blind and get away with it into certain things, which can either push her out of laning phase or just not really give her the all-in angles she's like wanting to snowball and find those advantages. In Garen and Morgana's case, they're a bit more niche towards the mid lane. Morgana obviously tends to be pretty specific in matchups where you can utilize the likes of Black Shield to nullify certain champions' abilities. Veigar, for example, can definitely struggle into the likes of Morgana. She can very much punish him, especially in a lot of game states where you have follow-up and like plays which you can make around your Q. In Garen's case, he's doing worse at the moment within the mid lane, where he's doing pretty poorly just generally across the board. A lot of the items which he really abused and found success with have been nerfed, making him a bit weaker. But I haven't instantly buffed him, which is interesting, because when a champion like Garen, who is very popular as like a beginner champion, is underperforming, they're usually pretty quick on it and then give him some sort of like compensation. But he's, not gone that. He's underperforming at the moment. Definitely sort of sits towards the lower end of the beta. But as always, if you're comfortable with a champion and you're like and you're picking like in specific matchups, it can definitely still have value and be a better solid B tier champion. That's the B tier. Actually, there's one other champion moving down. So LeBlanc's actually going to drop down from the A tier to the B tier. She was abusing Luden's Storm Surge. Both these items have gotten nerfed. She drops from the A tier down to the B tier. Still sits at the top of the B tier. If you're comfortable with snowballing on this champion, she can still be very oppressive within the game and definitely still find those one-shot angles. She's just not going to overkill targets as comfortably as before, and that can definitely feel punishing, especially if you're behind the curve in some of those scenarios and then you're not really being rewarded for like having this 2-item power spike. Pantheon moves up. He is still very good into the likes of Yasuo and Yone. That is where I'd primarily recommend playing Pantheon, into like Yone and Yasuo, especially in both just top mid as like a flex option. Past that, he can still function just generalistically, abusing his early game power to really get a lot of harass down with the Q. The W max health buff is nice. It's not a lot. It could definitely have done with being a bit more to really push him like up a lot. He's sat towards the low end of the A tier. He's not a high A tier pick, definitely. Primarily you're just playing him into specific matchups, but he can still find like big advantages and stable advantages within the game, which can definitely feel rewarding as like an AD mid lane pick, especially with some of them being a bit weaker at the moment. Gragas stays with my A tier, still a good burst mage, very unpopular within the mid lane. He could honestly be taken out, and there's just not a lot of players of this champion, but he's a solid 4-way flex pick, one of the best flex picks in the game, in fact. And if you pair alongside like an AD jungler where you're once again able to consistently snowball, this champion can definitely have a lot of value within the game. Malphite got weaker this patch with Thornmail being nerfed. In fact, they're compensating buffing him in 14.21. I'm honestly surprised Rammus didn't get compensation buffs. I think that champion actually lost more than Malphite as the two main users of Thornmail, as it's like an inherent part of their kit, especially with like their armor ratios. Rammus didn't get a buff. He stays relatively weak. Malphite getting compensation buff should definitely rise back up in the A tier in the mid lane. In the top lane, I imagine he might go towards the higher end of the A tier, and if it's big, then honestly could push his way into the S tier, as he's a very simple to play champion with like a very good direction within the game. In mid lane, you see like variants with the AD, with the armor variations and the AP variations, which can, it really depends what you need within the game. Sometimes AP Malphite is just the best way to play him, but I'd recommend defaulting on like the armor, especially into compositions where you can really get a lot of value out of him. You're not really drafting Malphite early on into a draft, as that can definitely be punished, but later on in the draft this champion can have huge amounts of value, so that is definitely where I'd recommend you play around his strengths. Nico stays within the A tier. Obviously, he can really abuse Protobelt quite nicely. He can also abuse some of the burst AP items, and that can definitely give her some strength, especially early on into the game. If you're behind the curve, this champion can feel really lackluster to play, even though she has two forms of CC in both the ultimate and the E. she kind of depends. I mean, a lot of her power really comes from like pilot driven stuff, like utilizing her W effectively, and then yeah, making sure you're getting a lot of value out of her strong laning phase, which can oftentimes get you the advantages you need to win the game. If you're not comfortable on Nico, it's fine. You don't need to play this champion. She's not meta defining by any means, so she sits towards the lower end of my A tier. Taliyah can be a great option if you are also looking for someone which has a like a solid anti-dash mechanic on their kit combined with good roam potential. Within the mid lane, she tends to just default onto just clearing waves, and then yeah, looking onto side lanes, that is the main kind of like playstyle with the Taliyah. She spikes very nicely mid game, and if you're ahead of the curve, she can be really powerful later on into the game, especially with the amount of burst she has access to with like a WE empowered Q combo. That can be a lot of her damage, and oftentimes just one shot certain targets if they don't have the resources to really survive it. Not towards the high end of the A tier, though, by any means. She definitely sits towards the lower end of the A tier in her current state. Vel'Koz has been underrated. I still think this champion's pretty good. Definitely, I'd say a tier above Ziggs in terms of artillery mage capability. His burst potential is substantially better than Ziggs. I mean, if you can land Ziggs' ultimate with like some form of CC, then Ziggs has decent burst, so Ziggs, I wouldn't say he has no burst by any means, like, but champion does actually have access to a decent amount. But Vel'Koz has really good single target capability, especially with his ultimate. If you land like a EWQ to get like proc on his passive combined with like an ultimate, that can be some serious single target damage and still be really effective later on into the game, especially if he is snowballing ahead of the curve. And even still solid artillery on this champion, so definitely going to sit towards the mid part of my A tier in his current state. Neferi got weaker. She was in my S plus tier for most of towards the end of last split, really benefiting from the buff she received back along. Assassin items got nerfed this patch, and she drops down a bit towards the middle of the A tier. I wouldn't really recommend picking up Neferi at the moment. I don't think she has great potential outside of like the lower elos, where she can really benefit from her point and click W, allowing her to be more of a stat check assassin more than anything. But if you're very comfortable with this pick, then once again she can still be very valuable. Renekton! I love Renekton. I think this champion's great at shutting down once again like Yasuo and Yones. You're not really playing him outside of like assassin matchups. He can really be quite vulnerable to mages, especially if he just doesn't have the tools to really get onto them. Once you have Strikebreaker completed in some of these matchups, then it can definitely turn it back in your favor, but he's not the kind of champion I'd recommend blinding in mid lane. More like a flex option if you're like a top to mid player, or just comes in later on in the draft and can still be quite valuable. More of a blind option definitely within the top lane, but there are better AD picks which I'd recommend over him. Things like Yone if you're looking for like a blind option with the mid lane, which can have better value into more champions within the pool. Yone obviously still gonna struggle a bit more, especially the lower rank you go and the less comfortable you are on the champion. Victor had been underrated for a while. I think this champion's still great, especially if you're able to get like your early like stack and earlier evolves. He can definitely feel quite punishing if you don't, like if you're not getting KP and you're not getting like, and you're not doing a good job at farming, then this champion can feel really lackluster, which at that point I'd recommend maybe looking elsewhere for certain other picks. But if you're very comfortable about looking for these like KP angles combined with the farming aspect of Victor, then this champion can definitely have value, and I think he's still a very solid A tier pick within the game. Ryze was slept on for a while. Is still kind of. I mean, more people are aware of this champion's strength at this point. I've definitely seen a bit more Ryze more recently, but yeah, you're definitely gonna look to play around like your EQ combo, clearing waves, looking for those burst angles with the EW point and click CC. He can definitely have value into specific matchups, and certain compositions can really benefit from having the likes of Ryze. I've seen a lot of people like discuss around what is the best rush option and what like options Ryze has to really build. I'd recommend looking at something like an Archangel's triple chapter variation. I've spoken to Vygar V2, that tends to be what Ryze's preference is at the moment. Things like Roa can still definitely function on this champion if you're like looking for that looking for a bit more bonus HP. That can still be something you opt into. But yeah, there's build variations which you can really benefit from. I know like Luden's Companion can feel quite nice on this champion in specific matchups where enemy team maybe has a lack of MR. Kassadin is getting nerfed next patch, but is doing still pretty well this patch. I'm honestly surprised they're nerfing him. Like, he wasn't doing too well for most of last split, and I wouldn't say he's overperforming this patch. He is a high A tier option, pretty close to the S tier, but there are still a lot of matchups he can struggle in, and oftentimes it comes down to the enemy making an error to really give Kassadin value within the game. But if Kassadin does hit those late game marks, like your level 16 with ultimate, then this champion's very hard to really shut down. So much mobility, so much burst damage, and that can definitely feel quite oppressive to play against. So he's definitely doing well at the moment, and you can definitely find success on this kind of a champion. Lissandra got buffed a couple of times last split and then nerfed going into Worlds as they were worried she was going to do too well there. I don't believe I've seen a single game, so that's kind of unfortunate, as it would have been nice to see some games of Lissandra. I think this champion definitely has strength within the game. It's a specific matchups where you can really get a lot of value out of your W and your ultimate. Things like LeBlanc can be really nice for Lissandra, as if LeBlanc ever puts herself in range of like executing her combo, Lissandra can just snap ult her, and that could just be the value, like as much value as you need within the game to just close it out. So Lissandra definitely has strengths into specific matchups. I think this champion's kind of slept on at the moment, and yeah, a very solid A tier pick. Ahri doing quite well. Is one, I think it's the premier mid lane pick for Worlds, which isn't banned. Obviously, Aurora and Yone are number 1, 2, especially within that regard, as both of them are flex options. But Ahri, I think, is the most played. And yeah, she's a very good champion. High mobility with the ultimate. Her burst damage is pretty nice. Her sustained fighting damage isn't even that bad. Like, you can still get a lot of value out of just casting Qs into the fights and being able to rotate this ability. There's definitely strength to it there. Would I say she is one of the best things to go to at the moment? Probably not. I think she definitely has strengths, and if you're comfortable in Ahri, then yeah, go ahead. Like, this pick's really good in her current state, but she doesn't quite have the scaling aspect and like the simplicity as some of my S tier, which I kind of rate a bit higher for like a mid to low elo tier list. So Ahri gonna be towards the high end of my A tier, but yeah, still a very good pick. What else have we got? So we've got Silas, who is also doing quite well at the moment. Really benefited from a bunch of the changes he received to kind of amp up like health stacking variations of Silas, where you're able to opt into things like Cosmic Drive, Roa, Protobelt. All these items can function quite nicely on him. You do want to play him into comps, which you can really get a lot of value out of that ultimates. Like an R5 Silas with an enemy Malphite on the team could just be the key to winning a lot of games. Obviously, Malphite not going to come in as blind most of the time, so you're not going to be rewarded with these kind of angles. But if you see them, this is the kind of thing I'd recommend putting some time into Silas with. But yeah, the champion, realistically, is pretty good at the moment, so sits within my A tier as like a very solid option. Hui is being nerfed next patch. People have caught on to the champion's strengths. He is very strong at the moment. I wouldn't quite have him S tier for like a mid elo, but in high elo, he's one of the best mages within the game. Definitely sits towards like the SS plus option, and some of those would definitely drop down with him being, as strong as he is at the moment. His, arsenal of abilities just gives him so much power and so many resources within the game, and he has like burst variations, burn variations, which can both function really well at the moment, so he's very deserving of a high A tier spot. Honestly, like the top of my A tier, these 4 champions, I do all think are really good and can definitely compete with the S tier options in their current state. Syndra is also within my A tier. She's doing quite well, just not quite as well with the nerfs towards Ludens and Storm, so she drops down towards the lower half of the A tier. Was like a high A tier option last patch, more of a low A tier option this patch. Cassiopeia, great into low range compositions where she can really utilize her kiting and close quarters combat abilities with like the Q, the E, the W, all making like it very hard to approach her effectively. Combined with the ultimate, all these tools can just give her so much power at close range combat. Diana going to be within my A tier as well, alongside Annie and Malzahar. So in this case, Annie is still a very simplistic champion. Tibbers is where some of the skill expression comes in, utilizing him to either effectively like zone control, utilizing him for burst, utilizing him for like wave management, can all be quite, maybe not challenging, but unique aspects of this champion, kind of akin to something like Daisy. But Daisy obviously is paired with Ivan, who is a jungler, so you don't really have that same level of dynamic. But yeah, Annie is still very simplistic, oftentimes can find consistent burst angles within the game. The champion is usually regarded as pretty boring alongside like the Malzahar. I've picked 2 very exciting champions next to each other, you could say. But yeah, still very, very cookie cutter. You know what you're doing within the game, and yeah, she can still have great amounts of value. In Malzahar's case, he's actually gained a lot of play rate over the recent patches. I think this champion is in a pretty good spot. Not quite S tier, like sits as more like a high A tier option at the moment. Honestly, like all three of these champions still like I'd say relatively high A tier options, especially if you get them within like good matchups where they either can like comfortably dominate laning phase or have like a lot of effective value within the game. Malzahar, obviously well known as being one of the best anti-carries within the game. Point and click ultimate, if you can get that on, if you can get that off on a carry within the enemy team, then yeah, this champion can just have so much value, and it can be really oppressive to play against Malzahar. And oftentimes that price of buying QSS can give Malzahar the advantage to really, snowball and take over the game, as that does punish. I mean, if let's say 3 carries on the enemy team all pick up QSS, that's instantly so much money gone trying to counter one specific ability on the enemy team. Obviously, that can have value. Like, you still want to buy QSS into Malzahar, especially if you are the carry of the team and you need that value to be able to play the game. Then that can just have so much value within the game. So it's a battle between where QSS is viable and like really needed within the game, and oftentimes where Malzahar can just change targets and just still have that level of value. Overall, yeah, the champion's still good. I'm just yapping. What else have we got? So we got Heimerdinger and Cho'Gath. These are the other 2 champions. I don't know if I spoke about Diana. I actually probably should. Diana, still very strong early game champion. It's pretty kind of well known at this point that Diana's power with like sort of phase rush, electrocute, even like things like summon area. I've seen some like different variations. Can just give her so much early laning phase power. Unlike Conqueror, which is a bit more for sustained fights and into tanky compositions, can still definitely have value. She's in a pretty good spot at the moment, and yeah, definitely sits towards the high end of my A tier in her current state. Ultimate can still feel quite lackluster though. That is my one complaint with Diana. I think if they siphon some of her early laning power and shift it into Ultimate, then I would be pretty happy with the kit overall. But obviously, I'm not a Diana main. They might just like it how it is. Heimerdinger has been set up for a while. I still think the champion's great at the moment, and very deserving of a mid A tier spot. And Cho'Gath, still a great tank. Obviously he has flex value between both mid and top. Most people won't really expect it to go in the mid lane, which is where you can have some like value into specific matchups if you feel really comfortable in. And obviously you have the alternate builds where you can like E with Grasp into melee matchups and Q with Comet into range matchups. Yeah, he's pretty good at the moment. I'd say he's a very solid tank, one of the best within the mid lane, which you can really have access to. 2 champions are dropping down, Vex and Xerath. In this case, both of these champions got nerfed with Ludens and Storm Surge being hit. They both relied on those items to burst and one-shot people within the game, and then snowball that advantage into more kills. Especially in Vex's case, she really did lose a decent amount of power, even though Yasuo and Yone both got buffed and are more like the 2 most popular champions in the game. She is still very good into those matchups. Like, you should pick Vex and like learn Vex if you are playing into a lot of these. If you're playing into a lot of Yasuo and Yones, you don't like ban these champions. Other than that, obviously, Pantheon, Reluctant are still very good options you can go to. But in her case, she really does rely on those dash matchups where you can continuously rotate passive and have a lot of value from that. In Zep's case, he just relies on being able to get early kills, snowballing, staying ahead of the curve, and the amount of artillery this champion can provide is still some of the best within the game. So he definitely sits towards the high end of the A tier. I think a lot of the A tier can really comfortably contest with the S tier if given the right environment. Within my S tier, so we have a couple of champions here. We have Nasus, who is still a very good bruiser within the mid lane. A bit more matchup dependent. You can't really go the Emax variation that much anymore, as obviously it got nerfed quite aggressively, so definitely lost a lot of power there. But he's still one of the strongest mid to late game fighters. Doesn't scale quite as hard as some people perceive him to, but within the mid game he's one of the best champions, if not just outright the best on 2 items. With the stacks combined with his stat checky nature and siege potential, he is very valuable to most compositions, even though he can definitely be abused early onto the game, especially into certain matchups which can kind of just continuously lay on pressure and just don't really give him the time to sustain back up or stack within the laning phase. That is where his biggest weaknesses lie, but you're not going to see that anywhere near as consistently within the mid elo, and I would really recommend playing this champion. At the moment, we'll have to see how the nerfs affect him in 14.21 as he is being nerfed when we go into that patch. Brand is still within my S tier. Still think this champion's a great mid to low elo mid laner. I do think he begins to fall off quite aggressively when you go into those higher ranks. People aren't going to consistently group and aren't going to give you as easy of a time like during laning phase, which is where some of his weaknesses do lie. But if you're able to just maintain your mana within laning phase, he can just auto push so many waves, and it can really be quite hard to ever siege this champion with just how much wave clear he has access to, combined with his amazing team fighting damage. The amount of DPS this champion can provide is some of the best within the game, and really deserving of an S tier spot. The other champions we have here are Aesol, who is going to be nerfed in 14.21. I was honestly surprised he got away with it this patch, as he is an incredibly good mid to late game champion. Does have weaknesses early on into the game. You can overwhelm this champion and really try to put him back as far as possible, but he will always eventually scale up to that mid and late game spikes, where his ultimate and his E combined make two of the strongest abilities in the game, as they both have so much range and decent damage over time. In the E's case, the ult obviously is a single damage, unless obviously you apply things like the Andrews. Anyway, I'm yapping. Both these abilities very effective, can make great team fighting tools, and then combined with the Q, the W, he does very good single target and honestly AoE damage if you are utilizing it effectively. This pick's still very good at the moment. A great mid to low elo champion. Could still have relevance higher up, but obviously he's being nerfed in 14.21, so you're not going to see as much of him, and I do think that he will probably receive a tap down to maybe his scaling, unless they want to try and nerf him for our higher ranks, which I would be surprised, because obviously a lot of his dominance does come from his mid to low elo scaling strength. In Galio's case, he's also being nerfed in 14.21. The champion's been good for a long time. I had him in the S+ tier for most of last split, and I still stand by that. He's one of the strongest within the game. If it wasn't for my two S+ champions, I think he would probably be back there, but he is a bit weaker than them at the moment. His two build variations obviously consist of the burst and the tank variation. Both are very good, especially if you choose them correctly within the game, or depending on what you need. If you need a bit more AP damage, then the burst one could be really valuable. If you need a bit more tanky capability in a frontliner, then the tank one could be really strong. So both of them work really well. Very deserving of an S tier spot at the moment, especially into certain matchups, or into magic, primarily magic damage compositions. This champion can just have so much value within the game. The two other champions here, we have Lux and we have Veigar. I'd say both these in Lux's case, she's a bit weaker with the Luden Storm Surge nerf, as she did opt into both these items quite consistently, and that is some power siphoned away from her, so she just dropped from being a mid to high S tier pick to a low S tier pick, but her ability to shove waves and burst champions down, if ever ahead of the curve, is just some of the best within the game, so I would still have her within the S tier. She's very simplistic in how you want to play her, and that can really give the edge to a lot of mid and low elo players who just want to pick up a good mid lane mage, which they can play quite consistently, which can be flexed like support as well. In Veigar's case, he is being dropped down from the S+ tier to the S tier. He got nerfed last patch. They took his W ratio down by 10% at all ranks, but he's still very good. He still has really strong build variations. We've seen some Roas, some Winter's Approaches, some Archangels. All of them can work really nicely depending on what you need within the game. And I'd say towards the lower ranks, definitely look more towards the Roa, as games are going to consistently go longer. And oftentimes you will want to opt into Winter's Approach in the higher ranks, where you are more consistently being targeted, and you need a bit more of a cheaper durability item. That can definitely be something you opt into. But overall, he's still a very good S tier pick, but just slightly below the S+ champions, which are Swain and Anivia. Swain is obviously being reworked in 40.21. He is probably the strongest champion in the game at the moment, but really unpopular. The current state of Swain is actually quite sad, because this pick has been popular in the past in different iterations, and I'm pretty sure it's still decently popular as a support, but as a mid laner, one of the strongest in the game, if not just outright the strongest. But unpopular. His ability to fight at close quarters combat is just the best out there, I think. With his ultimate, his Q, and his E all being great close range targeted abilities. Just has so much value, especially with, the capability of the Q shotgun, the E being able to pull and keep targets within your range, which is very valuable. And his ultimate, obviously, we all know just how strong that ability is. It just gives him so much power within team fights. And in Nivea's case, she has been under the radar strong for a while. I don't even know if she's being nerfed in 14.21. I don't remember seeing her on the list. If she isn't, she will be the best mid laner on the patch. And I do think she just has so much strength at the moment with the scaling. Honestly, her strength early game is still really powerful, especially once you hit 6 and you have access to that ultimate. It is very good for clearing waves and just making sure you can have as much roaming capability as possible. If you utilize her wall effectively, it is one of the strongest abilities in the game. It is so powerful. It can manipulate minion waves. It can completely manipulate team fights and provide so much zone controlling capability. It's just so strong as a basic ability. And yeah, compare really nicely with her kit. And overall, Anivia in a great spot at the moment. It's probably my recommended go-to if she doesn't get nerfed next patch. If she does, it'll be interesting to see how the climate of mid lane really shifts with a lot of the primary champions being nerfed next patch. But overall, yeah, those are my thoughts for 14.20. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.